So guys, we always talk about how it's bad idea to work with a large set of result set. So if you have like a huge table like this example, we have a student grade and there are like what? 12 million students here, right? Even if you add some sort of filters, let's say, hey, give me all the students that got grades between 90 and 100, right? And if you do that, yeah, you have a smaller result set, but still, it's a million students. Sometimes there is no option but to work with a larger data set. So if you actually execute select the student ID from grades, and you say, hey, give me all the students, you can do that definitely, right? So you can say, give me all the student IDs that got results from 90 to 100. And you can definitely do that. But good luck executing that query. And even if I execute, the database is doing a lot of work to pull, first of all, to do the execution plan, to find out which indexes to use, right? And then after that, it does the actual fetching. And then it compiles the results. And then if you're in another client machine, then that transmits that results into the TCP protocol. Depends on the database protocol. It will shove that into the network. And that is a lot of work. And then the client have to wait for all the results to come back, right? Obviously, I canceled it right here. Once you have all the results in the client, then the client have to have the memory to store all those results. So that is absolutely sometimes impossible to do. Meet database cursors, and I'm gonna talk specifically about server-side cursors here. So cursors that you create on the database. It says, hey, database, please, I'm about to fetch this result, but don't give me the result right now. Create a cursor, and then once you create that cursor, I'm gonna ask you to fetch results from that cursor. And only when I do that, you go and do the work, follow your plan, query or do your index only scan or your bitmap index scan or whatever full table scan if you didn't have any indexes, and then go and fetch those rows for me and then return just the ones I asked for. How do we do that? Let's explain how to do that. It's very, very simple. First of all, cursors have to work within a transaction. So we can do a begin transaction or just begin that does a transaction. And then you can say declare cursor C as type cursor for select star. Or just let's say I'm interested in the ID from grades where the grade is between 90 and 100. And then when you do that, it says, hey, I declare the cursor, it's good to go. You saw that it didn't actually execute the query, technically. It just came up with the map. It came up with the plan to actually plan this query. However, it didn't yet execute it. So now if I do fetch C, that act will fetch the first row based on the query plan that have taken place. So if I do that, give me the first row. Fetch C, give me the second row, and so on. You can go all one by one, and you can play with this as you want, right? And you can, for example, there are many things that you can do. Like, for example, fetch last. Give me the last entry for this for some reason, right? And you can give me, hey, fetch the last entry. And then you can see that the database is doing more work here. Say, okay, to fetch the last entry, I have to kind of scan through all of that stuff to determine what is the last entry, right? To pull that last entry. Sometimes the database have knowledge of how to obtain the last entry in a very efficient manner. Sometimes it actually doesn't, right? And that's when an index backward scan versus an index scan become really, really useful. So guys, what is the advantages and disadvantages? What is the pros of cursors? So the beauty of cursors is you save on memory in the client side, at least in your backend application that connects to the database, right? So if you have a spin up on a Python application or JavaScript or Go application, and you want to process a lot of results, but you want to do them piecemeal. You want to work with them slowly. You can open a cursor and then start pulling a number of rows, like say 100, let's start working with those 100. and then go move to the next one, and then do whatever you want with the 100, right? So you obviously, and then discard the memory for the 100 and then fetch the next ones, right? So it definitely saves a lot of memory, especially in the client side, right? Otherwise, you cannot pull 100 million rows in the memory, right? That's why I always get confused of these questions in interviews. Like, hey, sort this array, and I don't know, it has like a 1 billion row. It's like, what? Where did a billion row came into my memory to sort them? That's a bad idea, essentially, right? So I always like ask the interviewer back. It's like, okay, where are these actual values stored? Are they in a database somewhere? Are they in? Did they came up from thin air? Of course not, right? So if I can sort them while I pulling them up, that's probably a better idea, right? Than pull all of them in memory and then sort them in memory. So be careful from this question. You can essentially flip the interview on the interviewer when you know what you're talking about. So the second pros is streaming, guys. Right? Streaming is a good idea, right? When you want to pull the rows, and as you continue pulling the rows, you can stream them to another WebSocket connection. You can stream to a bunch of gRPC connection, and you can just continue pulling values, right? It can also be canceled, right? You can easily cancel a cursor. And the beauty of this is like, hey, I know I'm about to pull 1 million row, but I only worked with 100,000 and I'm good. Cancel that query, roll back, I'm good now. Go move on. So canceling is a good thing. Paging is another good idea, right? You can page with cursors. However, we'll learn that it's not as easy to page in a web application with cursors, because cursors is stateful. We'll come to that. Also can be used in a store procedure to write PLSQL programming language, fully fledged programming languages with cursors. All right. So about talking about the cons, what's bad about this? The bad about this is it's essentially stateful, right? But when it's stateful, that means there is a memory allocated for it in the database. So and there is a corresponding transaction that points to that cursor. That means if you made another request to another server, to another process, that process has no idea of your cursor. You cannot share cursors essentially, because that's just a property of the transaction. So statefulness is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's an advantage, sometimes it's a disadvantage if you want to horizontally scale, obviously, right? You cannot horizontally scale. You can do some tricks with proxies. If you know what you're doing, if you're savage DevOps engineer, you can make your web application understand that there is a cursor involved and send some sort of a variable that will stick you back to not only to the same server, but to the same transaction. However, that is extremely difficult to pull out, right? If you really wanted to do that and you can do paging with that approach, that is much better way of the current compared to the current paging that we do, which is essentially a stateless paging. Every request goes into another server, and that server does the query again, which is painful to the database. It's an insult to the database to execute the same query twice. Execute it once and then loop through it with a cursor. That's even better. But sometimes we cannot, obviously, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Another cons is long-running transactions, guys. Cursors, if you want to iterate through a cursor, you have to do it through a transaction. And that means your transaction is going to be running for a long time. And transactions running for a long time is not a good idea for the databases. Databases cannot do indexing properly. If you cannot do DDL on the table if someone is connected, right? You essentially stop people from doing normal work. Some write operations can be stopped by long-running transactions if you have acquired certain shared lock, right? All right, guys, that's it for me today. That was the pros and cons of database cursors demonstrated in Postgres. I'm going to see you in the next one. You guys stay awesome. Goodbye, y'all.